Some of the most profound, earth-shattering insights into what life is all about, they don't come from a place of comfort. They come from almost unimaginable suffering. And I can't think of a better example of this than the Russian novelist Fyodor Dostoevsky. So let's dive in and try to understand the mind of a man who was literally forged in the fires of his own personal hell.
I want you to picture this. It's a frozen square in St. Petersburg. A 28-year-old Dostoevsky, who's a promising writer but kind of struggling, is marched out with a bunch of other political prisoners. They're tied to posts, a white cloth is pulled over their heads, and they are staring down a firing squad.
He is absolutely convinced he has just minutes left to live. In what he thought were his final moments, he's trying to get his mind right, to say his goodbyes, to just look at a nearby church, at its golden dome sparkling in the sun. He later called this feeling a mystic terror. This moment, this near-death experience, it would haunt him and completely transform him. But here's the thing you have to understand about his work. This terrifying moment wasn't the beginning of his suffering. Oh no, it was more like the crescendo. His entire life and everything he wrote can really be seen as the answer to this one huge question.
See, Dostoevsky's life was already just steeped in trauma. He grew up on the grounds of a hospital, so he was around death and disease from a super young age. When he was a kid, a close friend of his was brutally murdered. Then, at 15, his mother died of tuberculosis. And just a few years after that, his cruel, abusive father was murdered by his own peasants. And this event was so shocking, it triggered Dostoevsky's first epileptic seizure, a condition that would plague him for the rest of his life.
So, what on earth landed him in front of that firing squad? Well, he joined this group of radical thinkers called the Petrushevsky Circle. Now, this was a time of intense political paranoia, and the Tsar's secret police had infiltrated the group. And for doing nothing more than discussing banned books and criticizing the government, Dostoevsky and his friends were rounded up and charged with treason. And this is where it gets just unbelievably cruel. At the very last possible second, a messenger gallops in with a pardon from the Tsar. But here's the twist. The pardon was never in doubt. The entire execution was a sham. It was a piece of state-sponsored psychological torture, staged just to terrify these prisoners into loyalty. And, well, it worked. That experience was seared into his soul forever. But he wasn't free. Nope. His new sentence was 4 years of hard labor in a brutal Siberian prison camp. He was shackled in 10 pounds of iron and dragged across the frozen wasteland. This place, which he called the House of the Dead, would basically become his PhD in human nature. Down in this abyss, he just became a student of what makes us tick. He watched as ordinary guards given absolute power became complete monsters. He noticed that the prisoners, they needed a hobby or some little side hustle, any sense of purpose, to keep from going totally insane. He saw that meaningless work, like just moving a pile of sand back and forth all day, was a torture way worse than any beating. And he discovered that even among the most vile criminals, there was this boundless capacity for both good and evil. He was surrounded by unimaginable filth. I mean, stuff that none of his fellow prisoners even seemed to notice anymore. And it led him to this profound conclusion. A defining feature of humanity is our incredible, almost scary ability to get used to anything, even the most horrific conditions you can imagine. Okay, so after 4 years in the camp and then 6 more years of forced military service, Dostoevsky finally gets to return to society. But he's not the same neurotic young man. He is now a man who has stared right into the abyss of the human soul. And he was about to unleash this terrifying new understanding in his book, Notes from Underground. And in this book, he argues for his most radical idea yet, that humans are not rational creatures. We don't just want happiness and logic. He says if you offered us a perfect world, a utopia where every single need is met, we would smash it to pieces out of pure spite, just to prove we're not cogs in a machine. We would choose to believe that 2 + 2 = 5 if it meant we could assert our own free will. This pretty much captures the whole spirit of his underground man. For Dostoevsky, free will, that means the freedom to choose evil, the freedom to choose suffering, the freedom to destroy yourself. That's the most precious and, the most terrible gift we have. Because without it, goodness itself would be completely meaningless. Now, this obsession with free will and what happens because of it, well, it takes center stage in his masterpiece Crime and Punishment. And it's the story of a poor student named Raskolnikov who decides to commit murder just to test out a philosophical theory. Raskolnikov's journey is just a masterclass in psychology. So he's got this theory that great men, like Napoleon, are above the law. To prove to himself that he's one of them, he murders a pawnbroker. But instead of feeling powerful, he's just crushed by this unbearable guilt and paranoia. His theory totally collapses. And he discovers that true redemption doesn't come from trying to justify his crime. It comes from confessing, from accepting his punishment, and from embracing suffering.
In his final, epic novel, The Brothers Karamazov, Dostoevsky just goes for it. He tackles the ultimate questions of faith, doubt, and the existence of God, all framed through the drama of a really, really dysfunctional family.
So the intellectual brother, Ivan Karamazov, he poses one of the most powerful arguments against God ever written. He just catalogs these horrific, true stories of children being tortured and killed. And he argues that he simply cannot accept a God who would build a universe where the price of ultimate harmony is the suffering of even one innocent child. If that's the price, he says, he would respectfully return the ticket.
Ivan's rebellion leads him to tell this story called The Grand Inquisitor. In it, the Inquisitor argues that Christ totally made a mistake by offering humanity freedom, because most people just can't handle it. He says they don't want freedom, they want bread, they want security, and they want someone to tell them what to believe. He claims the church basically corrected Christ's work by taking away that terrifying freedom in exchange for happiness and security. It is a chilling argument about the trade-off we're all tempted to make. So when you put all these pieces together, you start to see that Dostoevsky wasn't just a novelist. He was a prophet. He was a guy who foresaw the defining struggles of the modern world decades before they ever happened. I mean, think about it. His warning that people would trade freedom for security, that became terrifyingly real with the rise of totalitarianism in the 20th century. His deep dive into our hidden motives and our irrational drives, he basically mapped the unconscious mind long before Freud ever did. And his focus on freedom, responsibility, and that search for meaning in a meaningless world, that laid the foundation for existentialism.
And his influence is just monumental. Philosophers like Nietzsche, existentialists like Sartre and Camus, they all drew heavily from his work. Even Freud himself ranked Dostoevsky second only to Shakespeare in literary achievement, because he saw just how much profound psychological truth was packed into his novels. In the end, this quote just perfectly sums up Dostoevsky's whole life's work. His journey through unspeakable suffering wasn't just the source of his art. It was a deep, painful, but absolutely necessary exploration of what it truly means to be human. He never found any easy answers, but he left us with a question that still echoes today. In a world that's full of suffering, what will you choose to do with your freedom?